raging climate-related wildfires, torrential flooding, disastrous droughts, and hazardous waste leaks. Today's headlines are full of the 1,001 ways the climate crisis can harm you, your family, and the place you live. Yet communities of color and low-income families have long suffered from being on the front lines of such dangers. Fairness and justice are two words now central to climate change activism. They speak to the need to look out for frontline communities whose health and well-being are often most at risk from environmental disasters and climate change hazards.
I call it environmental justice, but environmental justice is more of a goal because when you look at the different communities that are impacted or negatively impacted the most, they are unjustly impacted. I'll put it that way. It isn't done in a just way.
A host of studies reach the same conclusion, Nixon says. Powerful polluting industries central to the climate crisis are routinely and deliberately located in or near communities of color and low-income neighborhoods.
They're looking at how what goes into siting these chemical plants or these hazardous waste facilities or a landfill, and where do they usually site them? And they usually site them, it seems to go by race. It's usually by African Americans or Hispanics. And then it's by income. If those communities aren't available or they're already full with other chemicals, then it goes to just the low income communities that are impacted.
Harry Caudle, author of Night Comes to the Cumberlands, referred to zones of national sacrifice in Appalachia, communities and people whose safety and health are sacrificed to create energy and profits. Nixon says the phrase is appropriate for many places in West Virginia, where environmental injustice is all too common.
This is Appalachia, and we're looked at in a different way than it appears that the rest of the country is looked at. We're considered hillbillies. We needed jobs. People could be trained to work in the plants. They could do the job. They could be depended upon to do the jobs. And they would do the jobs at the expense of their health because they had to take care of their family. And it's not just the chemical plants. This state is rich in natural resources. Same thing with the coal mines. But they all seem to be owned by out-of-state businesses. The physical impact, the health impact, doesn't affect the families of the owners of these large companies.
Environmental justice is what we aspire to. And when I think of the story of West Virginia and the environmental injustices it's had to accept and endure through being dependent on extractive industries that are polluting industries, other industries in Kanawha Valley, the Chemical Valley as we know it, it's sort of been an accepted reality for us that we have to live with this. And yet, when you take a look at how environmental injustice correlates with health disparities or racial or income disparities, you have to look at this all together, and that's truly West Virginia's story.
According to Rosser, life-threatening floods, fires, and droughts kicked off by the climate crisis will harm communities least able to withstand them or escape.
Some people, yes, will be more affected just in terms by where they live. If they're living in floodplains, they're certainly going to be more affected. But also the inequities in terms of access and resources and resiliency. All of that needs to be stacked up to truly understand how we must tackle this process, this crisis, and put equity at the center of solutions.
Addressing climate change means also addressing harm done to communities of color and low-income areas for far too long and preventing such harms from continuing as the climate crisis intensifies.
The issue of environmental justice is related to some of the work I'm doing now in restorative justice, because that's a dimension and that's a dimension for environmental justice, being a part of restoring communities, restoring connections, but also restoring conditions, that really have imprisoned, have infected, and have demoralized communities for years.
As a young man, English served as a ministerial assistant to Martin Luther King and gave a prayer at his funeral after King's assassination in 1968. He noted that Reverend King spoke of the three sins of the American system as militarism, racism, and economic injustice.
I'm sure that he would talk about climate change as being the fourth evil of our world, that we have perpetuated.
And we're going to need to balance all this out quickly. At the rate we're going and seeing all of the problems that are occurring here on Mother Earth, as a result, she's crying out with the drought and with the fires and with extreme weather events, from the tornadoes to the hurricanes. She's saying that she needs help. She can't do it by herself, and we need to take responsibility. We need to be good shepherds of the earth.